Gentle dad. Just a little. Mom can hear my voice tremble slightly. Weak like the sound of wind blowing through the crack of the door. My throat tightened, each word came out with difficulty. As if I was trying to hold back something about to burst. My heart pounded in my chest. As if it were ready to explode. My hands unconsciously tightened around the blanket. My breathing was no longer even ragged. Intermittent. Every small sound in the quiet room made my heart skip a beat. Afraid that this secret would be exposed. Hello everyone. I am Kopi today. I will share my story. A tale I once believed I would keep buried forever. Never to speak of again. The heartbreaking truth is that I am the one at fault in this narrative. It feels so far-fetched. Something that could only unfold in the realm of movies. Yet it transpired in my own life. No matter how desperately I wish to forget. The events remain etched in my mind. Haunting me daily. I fear I will never be able to rectify my mistakes or find peace with the person I deeply wounded. The scars I inflicted were not merely emotional, they also severed the trust that once existed. Despite my efforts, I cannot erase the consequences of my actions. I am a girl living with my parents in the serene town of Carmel by the Sea, California. A place that feels both peaceful and poetic. My father, Gage, owns a renowned seafood restaurant in the area. He takes great care of his body and enjoys going to the gym. So despite nearing 50, he remains toned, strong, and appears much younger than his age. He is strong and decisive, yet always gentle. My mother, Yisa, teaches literature at the nearby high school. She embodies gentleness and delicacy, with a particular love for classical literature. Each night, she often sits by the window, lost in thought, reading books under the warm light. I find myself reflecting on the invaluable lessons and profound love imparted to me by my mother. She has been my guide, teaching me the essence of living sincerely and emotionally from my earliest days into adulthood. Throughout my life, I have been enveloped in the unwavering love of both my parents, who dedicated themselves wholeheartedly to my care and protection. I still remember the joy of running to my father each time he returned home from work. A cherished ritual that filled my childhood with warmth. As I leaped into his embrace, my small arms encircled his neck, holding him close. In those moments, my father represented the ultimate sanctuary. A haven where everything felt right and safe. As if his presence alone could shield me from the world. I paid little attention to it. Just experienced a sense of safety and love. I was a free-spirited girl who adored fresh and beautiful things. I often selected for myself the most stunning and exquisite items available to me. I would rush to my parents, twirl around a few times, and eagerly await their compliments. Their love shone through their smiles, and their eyes sparkled with pride. Those simple affirmations filled me with joy, making me feel like the happiest girl in the world. After every dinner, when the family gathered around the TV, I had a cherished routine of sitting on my father's lap. His gentle, warm hugs enveloped me, and I grew accustomed to that tender pampering. Even as I grew older, I clung to the habit of sitting on my father's lap, as if I were still that little girl yearning for love and protection in his safe embrace. To me, that ritual was a bond, a small joy that I held dear. I never wanted to leave. But lately, every time I sit on my father's lap or rush to hug him, the feeling was different. There was something peculiar in the way he responded that I couldn't ignore. He no longer embraced my hugs with the same ease as before. Like before. Instead, there was a pause. Sometimes his arms tightened a little more than usual. The way my father looked at me was also different. No longer just the gentleness and warmth of a father loving his child. There were times when I could clearly feel the confusion in his eyes, as if he was hiding something that I couldn't understand. At times like these my heart beats faster, as if my intuition tells me that something is wrong. But I don't want to believe it. Maybe I'm thinking too much, maybe it's just a passing feeling. But no matter what, this abnormality always sticks with me, making me feel that things are no longer as simple as before. As I said, my father likes to exercise. So even though he's old, he still maintains a strong and stylish body like when he was young. He's not only a father but also a model of strength and charm that I've always admired. When I look at my father, I can't deny that he's still very handsome with broad shoulders and a toned body. Every time he walks by I still feel very fond of him, a strange feeling that I can't clearly define. Maybe it was the confidence he exuded, or the strong appearance of my father that still reminded me of my childhood days when he was my whole world. But lately that feeling was a bit different. It wasn't just the admiration of a daughter for her father, but more like a vague, indescribable feeling. I found myself looking at my father longer than usual. And whenever I was near him, something inside me arose. I found it rather unusual. But one day, as was my routine, I returned home from school. And my father was already there, as he often was, arriving earlier than usual than my mother, and usually sat on the sofa watching TV. His eyes glued to the screen. As soon as I walked in the door, I still saw him sitting there, peaceful and familiar. Without hesitation, even though I was grown up, I ran to him, feeling like everything was so natural. I jumped on him, sat on his lap like when I was a child without a second thought. Dad hugged me like he always did, but this time something was different. The hug was still warm, but the atmosphere between us was different, making me feel less comfortable than before. Even so, I tried to push the feeling away, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. I realized that something was touching me as I sat on Dad's lap. At first I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just the uncomfortable position I was in sitting in. Or maybe it was something in his pocket. But the longer I sat, the more it became clear. Like a presence that couldn't be ignored, my heart started to beat faster, and suddenly the atmosphere felt strange, heavy, and stuffy. I felt awkward, not knowing what to do. The closeness that had always made me feel safe now made me feel uneasy and uncomfortable. I sat still, trying to keep myself calm, but unanswered questions arose in my heart. Dad's eyes were shy and hushed like my own. We both said nothing and just sat in the stuffy atmosphere until Mom suddenly walked in, breaking the atmosphere. I wanted to stand up, but it felt like my legs were tied down, unable to move. Dad didn't say anything, just silently looked at me. And in his eyes, I no longer recognized the familiar warmth of the old days. Then suddenly the sound of the door opening rang out. My mother walked in, breaking the stuffy atmosphere. We both quickly looked away from each other, and I quickly stood up, trying to act as normal as possible. But the strange feeling was still there, weighing heavily on my heart like something that could never be returned to the way it was before. Even though everything looked normal inside, I clearly felt the change. My dad seemed to start caring more about me. He often asked about me, paying attention to the little things in my life that he had never noticed before. He started buying me new clothes and things that I didn't ask for. Those gifts confused me at first, but gradually I realized that this care was not like fatherly love anymore. Every time it happened, I couldn't deny the strange feeling. It was like we were becoming a couple rather than father, and so the distance between me and my father was not just physical. His gaze became distant, and the moments of the silence was longer than ever. I felt something shifted in the air between us, an unspoken tension that I struggled to confront. Then came that unforgettable day when the wall between my father and me crumbled. My mother had left for a business trip, leaving just the two of us at home. I returned from school, and what greeted me was entirely unexpected. On the dining table, my father had laid out a lavish dinner. The atmosphere transformed, taking on a hint of romance. Candlelight danced softly. The aroma of the food was enticing, and 2 bottles of red wine stood proudly on the table. My surprise was palpable, my eyes widening as I turned to my father, laughter escaping me. "Why are you so thoughtful today?" I believed it was merely a coincidence, a delightful surprise devoid of any hint of something more profound. My father, wearing his customary smile, mentioned he had good news to share about a successful outing at the restaurant that he wanted to celebrate. He seemed genuinely happy, and I chose not to inquire further. Questions lingered in my mind as I sought to savor this dinner with my father. We sat at the table, sharing food and drink, the wine flowing smoothly into our glasses. The soft glow of candlelight enveloped us, creating a warmth and intimacy that felt unparalleled. In that moment, everything appeared perfectly normal, achingly familiar. Yet beneath the surface, this closeness began to evoke a deeper, indescribable feeling. We dined and shared confidences, reminiscing about stories from the past. From my childhood, I remember being that little girl who always clung to my father. Sweet memories and little jokes filled our time together, making us both laugh as if all the tension from before had melted away. Laughter echoed in the warm room, and the atmosphere between us felt closer than ever. After finishing 2 bottles of wine, I began to feel the effects. My mind became hazy, and the alcohol blurred all reason. We sat closer to each other, and I'm not sure if it was the alcohol or something else. But suddenly a question slipped from my lips that I never thought I would ask. Do you like me? I inquired with a voice that was gentle yet no longer childlike. For the question I posed was not one of innocence. It bore a weighty significance, as if I were seeking understanding from a vantage point my sober mind would never permit me to articulate. My father paused, enveloped in silence for a moment. Then he turned to look at me, his eyes deep and contemplative, as if he were examining something within me. He answered, his voice warm. Yes. Just one. The word hung in the air, weighty and laden with unspoken significance. In that instant, our gazes locked, and time itself appeared to stand still. What lay between us had transformed from the familiar bond of father and son into something entirely different, transcending all the boundaries I had previously understood. In that moment, I was uncertain of what compelled me. Perhaps it was the influence of the drink. Perhaps it was the emotion that had been buried for so long, unspoken. I softly reached out and embraced my father's neck, a peculiar sensation enveloping my entire being. Yet I did not pull away, consider any further. I only knew that at that moment I couldn't control myself. My father paused for a moment, but then he returned my hug. His arms wrapped around my waist, hugging me tighter. The distance between us was no longer there. We looked at each other, our eyes meeting for a long moment as if no more words were needed. We both seemed to understand each other's hidden thoughts without words. We kissed each other slowly and cautiously at first, as if we were rediscovering a familiar tenderness. But after a few seconds the hesitation disappeared, giving way to an intense, overwhelming feeling. Our hugs became tighter and tighter. Not just to get closer, but as if we wanted to hold on to this moment forever. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt the warmth of my father's body making everything around me disappear. My father began to gently touch my back. His hand seemed to explore every line, every breath. The initial tenderness gradually gave way to longing caresses. As if my father could not control the rising desire, his fingers slid over every part of my body, cautious yet greedy, as if he wanted to explore everything without missing anything. Every touch, every gesture made me shiver, as if my skin knew how to respond to his every movement. My father picked me up gently but firmly, his strong arms holding me tightly, as if he didn't want to let go. Wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling the rush of our breaths as he walked confidently, guiding me into the dimly lit room. In that moment, we were oblivious to everything else, time, space, only focused on each other. As if the world had come to a standstill, all thoughts faded away, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of longing and a profound connection that words could never capture. My father gently placed me on the bed, and our lips met once more, merging in sweet, passionate kisses that felt unbreakable. I could sense his warm breath mingling with the rapid rhythm of my heartbeat, while his hands began to move with a deliberate slowness. Unbuttoning my shirt with each button undone, the feeling of being naked came not only from the clothes leaving my body, but also from the vulnerability that we were both revealing. That feeling made my heart clench, but at the same time all the reservations gradually disappeared. That night we no longer held anything back. All barriers, all reservations were broken, as if the world was left with only the two of us. Every gesture, every touch, had a deeper meaning, as if wanting to engrave each other's image into our minds and bodies. We gave each other everything, not just physical intimacy, but also the fusion of emotions, of secret desires that had been suppressed for so long. That night both of them understood that all boundaries had been erased, and there was nothing but each other's absolute presence in that moment. The next day, when my mother returned home, everything seemed to have returned to normal. My father and I acted normally, both smiling and chatting as if nothing unusual had happened that night before. My mother remained oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. Everything unfolded as usual. We shared breakfast, engaging in mundane conversations like any typical family. Yet, beneath the surface, an unspoken understanding lingered between us. A heavy silence enveloped my father and me, where every glance and gesture bore a weighty significance, as if we were bound by a secret that remained hidden from the world. Despite our awareness of its wrongness, we continued our clandestine meetings, hurried and fraught with tension, caught in a struggle between guilt and desire. Each touch and look suggested an unspoken agreement to persist, devoid of words or promises. One night, as my mother slept, my father quietly entered my room, his presence barely audible in the silence, while I was deep in slumber, completely unaware that my father had been lying next to me. I was startled awake by the strange warmth enveloping my body, his arms around me. I pivoted. I tilted my head slightly and noticed his familiar face nearby. A moment of surprise washed over me, but then my lips formed a gentle smile as I embraced my father. In that instant, everything else faded away, leaving just the two of us. Gently, "Dad, be careful. Mom will not listen," I whispered, my voice quivering like the frigid wind seeping through the crack in the door. Each word felt like a struggle, as if I were battling something profound within me, on the verge of breaking free. My throat constricted, yet my heart pounded fiercely and erratically in my chest. My hands instinctively clutched the blanket, attempting to quell the tremors coursing through me. My breathing grew uneven, as if each inhalation was stifled by an unseen force. The room hung in an eerie silence. The slightest sound sent waves of anxiety through me, a whisper that made my heart race, terrified that our secret, this thrilling love, would be uncovered by others. The fear of exposure, of revealing all we sought to conceal, slowly morphed into an obsession. Yet, I found myself unable to refuse every time Dad arrived. I came to understand that I was trapped in this relationship, unable to break free despite knowing it was destined to conclude. It was a day I had dreaded, the moment I had tried to sidestep. My mother called to inform me that something had arisen and she wouldn't be home as scheduled, only returning the following morning. A fleeting sense of relief washed over Dad and me, as we believed we had the night to ourselves. We were carefree, convinced we had time. But then, unexpectedly, my mother returned earlier than anticipated. In our oblivion, we failed to notice her entrance. She stood there, silent. And in that instant, I understood that everything had unraveled. The world seemed to crumble before her eyes. And in that moment, all was lost. I experienced a sense of suffocation. Silence enveloped us, my father frozen in place, struggling to conjure an excuse. The air in the house was thick with heaviness and tension. allowing no space for understanding or compassion after my mother confronted the chilling reality. Her lips remained sealed. I quietly left the house, feeling the atmosphere freeze around me. The dynamic between my father and me had shifted, becoming strange and laden with pressure. An indescribable embarrassment hanging in the air. We struggled to express our feelings, uncertain about how to handle the consequences of our revealed secrets. The days that followed were steeped in heavy silence. My mother was absent. And eventually, she filed for divorce. My parents chose to end a marriage I had once believed was unbreakable. The house felt empty and cold, leaving me to confront the remnants of a family that had once been filled with happiness. I found myself in chaos, torn between my father and mother, uncertain of which path to take. My father, once my pillar of support, has now become the catalyst for my unraveling. My mother, who nurtured and cherished me throughout my childhood, now feels distant, burdened by an unhealable sorrow. I have come to realize that my misguided emotions and vulnerabilities have led to irreversible consequences. My entire family is fractured due to choices I never anticipated would result in such devastation. The fallout has not only impacted my mother but has also created a rift between my father and me, eroding the love and trust we once shared. It has dawned on me that the boundaries within family relationships must be honored. Once they are breached, there is no returning to the way things were. Love, no matter how profound, cannot mend such grave errors. Now, I find myself at a crossroads, uncertain of my future and the relationships I once held dear. I am unsure if I can confront my father or mother or if they still have a place for me in their lives. The family I once knew has become a painful echo, and the road ahead remains shrouded in ambiguity. I understand that I must confront the consequences of my actions and learn to endure this pain indefinitely. I realize that upon hearing this narrative, many will judge me, labeling my deeds as unforgivable. But I accept that reality. I comprehend that each individual possesses their own perspective, and I am prepared to embrace all forms of judgment. The most crucial aspect is that I have summoned the courage to confront my own truth, acknowledging the pain and repercussions of my past mistakes. To those who are hearing this narrative, my final piece of advice is to remain vigilant and uphold boundaries in every relationship, particularly within the family. At times, love and intimacy can obscure our judgment, leading us to make choices we never anticipated. Remember, every action carries consequences, and some mistakes are irreparable, leaving behind enduring pain and damage. Do not allow fleeting emotions to cloud your judgment. Resist the pull of weakness that seeks to lead you astray. Respect boundaries and safeguard love and trust within the family. For once they are shattered, there is no turning back. Often, we have but a single opportunity to cherish what truly matters, and losing it can lead to profound heartache. I appreciate everyone for taking the time to hear my story. If you found it meaningful, I invite you to support me by liking and subscribing to the channel, ensuring you won't miss the upcoming tales. Thank you very much. And until we meet again.